Hi there, IceMan Gaming here. I'm the IceMan. Welcome to another Raid Shadow Legends video. So today we've had this drop. I thought I'd put out a video on it, see what everybody thinks. There we go. If I move myself over here, this might be a little bit easier to read. In fact, we will move up here. So what have we got? The news has dropped today. Update 2.21 highlights as of Monday. The reason I say this is due to the fact that we actually have the Fusion Champion coming on Monday right here. Now I wasn't actually going to do a video about this, but since I'm doing one for the update in general, we'll start with this anyway. So you may have heard, you may not have heard, but Monday we are getting a new fusion event. It will be a standard style fusion event where you need to fuse 4 epics or collect 4 epics and then fuse those into the legendary, as all the older previous ones we've had. So, right, this new fusion we've got, his name is Vergum Mutakar. I'm totally butchering that, I'm sure. He's a legendary spirit champion of a support type from the Lizardmen faction. He has 4 abilities plus an aura. His first ability attacks one enemy, has a 35% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. The chance increases by 15% for each buff on the target. That sounds like a pretty cool ability, to be honest, depending on how it books up and everything else. But obviously, if a champion's got a whole heap of buffs on them, Valkyrie's put up a shield, plus the counter attack, maybe got a Muslim mage on that team, or Duchess, somebody along those lines, pumping out loads of buffs, that stun chance may well go up to 100%, so that's pretty cool. Then we've got removes all provoked debuffs and 1 random debuff from all allies, places a 60% increased defense buff for 2 turns on allies who have debuffs removed. Also places a shield buff on all allies equal to 20% of this champion's max HP for 2 turns. So yeah, that's going to be a pretty nice. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. Looks pretty cool. This should be interesting at least. Alright, we'd all prefer a full-on just cleanse ability, but you know, there's plenty of provoked champs out there. Morley, Umbral, Enchantress, you know, to name but a couple, who CC a team by putting out all these provokes. This is obviously going to remove those provokes, then buff your team up and put shields out and increase defense, which is quite nice. Then we've got the A3, attacks all enemies. Let's go through the name, shall we? Crushing Trample. Attacks all enemies, removes 1 random buff from each enemy, has a 75% chance of removing 2 random buffs from each enemy, places a 100% block heal debuff for 3 turns on enemies who have more than 4 buffs removed. Also places a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns on enemies who have 2 buffs removed. It's on a 5-turn cooldown. I'd imagine at the very least this is going to book down to a 3 or a 4-turn cooldown, possibly with a chance of being booked up to 100% chance of removing 2 buffs, which will be quite cool if it does. 4-turn cooldown, decreased defense, AoE is not bad at all, certainly a strong move. One we'll look forward to having. Obviously for those who already have Madam Ceres, it's not going to be anything spectacular, but it's certainly going to help in faction wars, and it's certainly going to help if they do any like Lizardmen only teams for dragons or ice golem or anything like that going forwards. It may well help if they have any sort of special requirements in the Doom Tower coming up. And certainly if you haven't got a Madam Ceres, I'd say this is a champion well worth working towards for these abilities, but particularly this one, which is a nice AoE decrease with some other great skills in there. Then as a bonus, she has a passive, Saurian Stoic, immune to provoke debuffs, fills this champion's turn meter by 20% each time an enemy attempts to place a provoke debuff on this champion. Now that's really clutch. It's really going to be great in the arena. You've got an Umbral or somebody, Molly out there throwing out these provokes. She's not only not going to get provoked, she's going to get a boost to her turn meter by 20% each time they do this as well. Alright, you're not going to get a lot of turn meter boost in here, I don't think, but just the immunity on its own is pretty good, and certainly getting the boost as well is really nice. Then we've got an aura increases ally resist in all battles by 55. Not the highest in the game, certainly, but a nice ally resist lead. And it's in all battles, which is always handy. Certainly going to be a great arena champion, I think, especially for those that don't have the likes of Madame Ceres, and certainly for those that don't have Madame Ceres or a Stag Knight. She's going to be quite cool there, I think. Certainly in a way more comparable with Stag Knight being Spirit Affinity, just like he is. Okay, so let's go back to the top, shall we? Here comes the news, and we'll start with it. So it's, hey everyone, autumn has come to Teleria and our champions celebrate it with a festival of ale and good cheer. Oh, that sounds nice. Ale and good cheer. Let's try, we could do some of that right now. Just for the occasion, we are releasing 22 new ones for you guys to enjoy. You can find the entire list below. But that's not all. We will also remove rare skill tomes from Classic Arena Gold tier and Clan Boss Nightmare and Ultra Nightmare awards. Thank you, Plarium. We did need this. It's about time they finally got around to it. They did say they were going to do it, but you know, it's here now. Great, we do appreciate that. Okay, so let's have a look at this first one. Interesting champion, Ursurga Warcaller, a legendary Void, HP based Barbarian champion. Can't say she looks much like a barbarian to me. She looks a little too flabby and, you know, chubby for that. She'd fit better on the ogre and tribes or something, even an orc. The barbarians tend to be sort of sleek, muscular, usually quite scantily clad. We definitely don't want to see this one scantily clad. Anyway, that aside, I do think that, you know, the aesthetic might be a bit wrong in fitting in with the barbarians, but I suppose you could look at her as some sort of matronly, motherly type elder of the clan, if you will. So anyway, she's got 4 abilities and an aura to boot. We've got Gigantic Cudgel, attacks one enemy, has a 45% chance of placing a block cooldown skills debuff for 1 turn. That's pretty cool, not bad. It's only one champ, but you know, and I'm sure that'll probably book up a bit. Then we've got Barrel Through as our A2, attacks all enemies, places a 30% decrease crit damage debuff and a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns on targets who attack is higher than their defense. Now that's interesting. We'll move on to this second part in just a second. Let's just talk about this first bit. So any damage dealer, 90% of the time, unless of course, certainly any attack based damage dealer is going to have a higher attack than the defense. This won't really work on defensive based damage dealers who are going to have high defense, high crit damage, low attack, but certainly for the high attack champions out there, they are going to likely have a higher attack than their defense, or people might have to think about building them differently depending on how annoying this champion can be. Anyway, let's move on. Certainly an interesting ability. I like the way they're thinking about doing things slightly differently there. Okay, so places a 30% decrease speed debuff and a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns on targets whose attack is equal to or lower than their defense. Well, that's really cool actually. So yeah, any attack based nukers. Oh wait a minute. So that's on targets who are higher, and on the defensive ones where the defense is higher. Yeah, so if the attack is equal or lower than the defense, so this is going to be your defensive based champions who are DPS. She's going to put out a decreased defense and a decreased speed. That's actually a really cool ability, so it's actually going to affect the right people the right way, rather than just a champion who just does decreased defense or just does decreased attack. She's going to do decreased attack on the people who need attack and decreased defense on the people who need defense. I really like that ability. It sounds really cool. I'm certainly going to be looking forward to getting my hands on her, sort of. And right, so her A3 bottoms up. Okay, obviously a bit of a drinker. Places a 50% ally protection buff on all allies except for this champion for 2 turns. Places a 25% strengthen buff on this champion for 2 turns. Not brilliant. Ally protection's a nice move. And she's putting her strength in there to make herself a little bit tougher and take it. And certainly if she's already used this sort of ability and decrease their attack and defense and all the rest of it, this will really give you some nice support. Golden Guard, her passive, decreases the damage all allies receive from critical hits by 30%. This champion will receive that damage instead. Ooh, Right, so obviously we don't know her stats at the moment, but you're definitely going to be wanting to build this champion really, really tanky. She's going to need to take that damage because obviously she's going to be receiving 30% of the critical hit damage from all allies. So she's either going to go down really quick, or you really need to build her with a high HP and a high defense to really soak up that damage. Certainly, because she's going to be taking that all the way through possibly as well. So then we've got an aura. Increases ally HP in all battles by 33%. Nothing special, but any aura that you can use is great. Obviously, we've gone against Vergamuk, or gone through Vergamuk, I should say, already. Alright, so our next is a epic Force HP Barbarian Champion, Baroth the Blood-Soaked. Not so sure about the look here. It'll be interesting to see what the actual avatars look like in the character section. They usually do a really good job with their art, so it'll be really nice to see. She's only got 3 abilities. We've got Gilded Weapons, attacks one enemy 2 times, so this will make her at least somewhat viable for Fire Knight. First hit has a 20% chance of filling this champion's turn meter by 10%. The second hit has a 20% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 10%. So, and again, this may book up to be a bit higher, and obviously there are masteries that you can take that will increase this slightly. Yeah, it definitely sounds very viable for the Fire Knight there, but obviously should be usable in much more content than just that. Splattering Hacks, attacks one enemy 2 times, so again another 2-hitter, so definitely very viable for the Fire Knight. The first hit places a shield equal to 25% of the damage inflicted on all allies for 2 turns. The second hit heals all allies by 10% of the damage inflicted. That's a nice sort of support ability there. Then we've got Serpent Axes, basic, attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit has a 75% chance. We'll ignore that one. We'll look at her Ascended. So anyway, Ascended attacks one enemy 2 times. The first hit has a 75% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns, and a 75% chance of removing any increase attack buffs from the target. The second hit has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns, and a 75% chance of removing any increased defense buff from the target. I like that. She's going to have some good support benefits there, and obviously quite useful in the Fire Knight and maybe even a bunch of other places. Now this is one I love. The picture of the avatar looks really cool. Okay, so Fane, rarity epic, spirit affinity, attack type champion on the Skinwalkers faction. Again, has 3 abilities. Exotic Blades, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 35% chance of stealing 5% of the target's current turn meter. Again, makes it quite viable for the Fire Knight. Flower's Tears, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing 2 5% poison debuffs for 2 turns. I'm sure this may well book up. Ascended, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing 2 5% poison debuffs and a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. That's quite cool. Attacks one enemy 3 times. The first hit has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 3 turns. The second hit has a 75% chance of placing a 25% weakened debuff for 3 turns. The third hit heals his champion by 4% of their max HP for every debuff on the target. Now, I could see this making her quite... I mean, obviously the turn meter thing has nothing to do with it, but certainly the lane poisons, decreasing attack for 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown, possibly you might be able to reduce that as well. Then we've got single target, decreased defense, and a weaken. So this will make it quite viable to a degree, certainly on the mid to low end clan boss, possibly higher end. We'll have to give it some playtime and build her out and have a look if we get hold of her. Okay, so our next champion is Caden, an epic magic affinity champion, defense based from the Dark Elves faction, and his 3 abilities are Halberd's Fall, attacks one enemy, has a 15% chance of placing a provoked debuff for 1 turn. Shatter Sweep, his A2, attacks all enemies, has a 75% chance of placing a 50% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. And then Favour of the Chamber, let's go for the Ascended. This revives 2 random allies with 50% HP and places a 60% increased defense buff on them for 1 turn. It's kind of cool. Nothing amazing there, nothing that's sweeping me away. I wouldn't be jumping for joy if I got hold of him, but he certainly looks somewhat interesting. You can do a AoE decrease attack anyway. You can provoke one at a time, and then he's got a revive as well for 2 random allies to 50% and an increased defense. So yeah, that's quite cool. Let's move on. We have 2-Hack the Wanderer, an epic void affinity attack-based champion from the Orcs faction. She has quite a bit to her kit by the looks of it. We've got Unfair Fight on the A1, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance of increasing the cooldown of one of the target skills by 1 turn at random. Cool. A little bit RNG for my taste, but still cool. Increases the cooldowns of all of the target skills by 1 turn instead if this champion has less than 50% HP when attacking on each hit. I might have to read that again. So from the sounds of it, if this champion is below 50%, actually has a chance of putting all the target skills on cooldown for 1 turn on each hit. It's only a 50% chance, but with 2 hits, that's still pretty good. And again, made book out. The A2, Whirl of Battle, attacks all enemies, has 75% chance of placing a 30% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Also places a 30% increased speed buff on this champion for 2 turns. Heals this champion by 15% of the damage inflicted if they have less than 50% HP when attacking. Cool. AoE decreased speed, increased speed on this champion, so that's not bad. Heals this champion. Alright, only if they're under 50% HP, but still not bad. Interesting. Not, groundbreaking or anything, but interesting. Covert Brutality. Attacks one enemy, steals 50% of the target's current turn meter, has a 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 2 turns. Steals 100% of the target's turn meter if this champion has less than 50% HP when attacking. Again, one of those champions that seems to pair well maybe with somebody who drops an unkillable or something. If they're at low health, they're going to be doing more, healing more, dropping 100% turn meter. It's only on 1 champion, but then they are only an epic, so, could be interesting. Decreases the damage taken by this champion. Now the passive Ironheart decreases the damage taken by this champion by 20% when their HP drops below 60. All their abilities kick in at 50, but at 60 they're going to take less damage. Still cool. And then they've got an aura, increases ally attack in all battles by 22%, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at, and certainly maybe interesting. Let's move on. So now we're into the rares. Draconis. I love that name, that's cool. Sounds like a very dragony name. And we've got a Void Champion, HP base from the Sacred Order faction, the A1. Oh, I'm going to struggle with this one. Beneficence. Attacks one enemy, heals the ally with the lowest HP by 7.5% of the damage inflicted. A2, Sacred Wards, places a shield buff on all allies equal to 15% of this champion's max HP for 2 turns. Not too bad, could be quite nice. And that paired with the A1 could top people up nicely, I suppose, especially if there's a counter-attacker on the team or you've got an ally attack champion. And then we've got Order of Mercy attacks on the A3, attacks one enemy, removes all debuffs from the ally with the lowest HP, and heals them by 25% of the damage inflicted. So yeah, nice little healing support champion there. Not brilliant. Most end-game players are obviously not going to be too interested, but certainly for lower to mid-game players who can grab hold of him, he might do some good. And you never know, he might do some good for the faction wars at the very least, if you're lacking that sort of healer support role. And we've got Sanctum Protector, obviously rare, spirit affinity, defense based from the Sacred Order. His A1 is Repel Intruders, attacks one enemy, has a 15% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. 15's a bit low, I think, but Then we've got Hallowed Ground for the A2, basic. Let's go for the Ascended. Attacks all enemies, then places a 30% increased defense buff on all allies for 2 turns. That's nice. I mean, he's a defense-based champion anyway, and he's buffing everybody's defense, and everybody's, not just himself, so that's cool. Obviously, the Unascended version just does him, the Ascended version does everybody, so obviously it'd be well worth sending him out. Rare books are a lot easier to come hold of, so that would at least be viable, so why not? Let's see. Then we've got False Bravado, attacks one enemy, has a 70% chance of placing a provoke debuff for 1 turn. 5 turn cooldown, not brilliant, not terrible. Again, he's the sort of champion that may fill some gap in your rosters depending on what you've got and what you need. Next we have Avir the Alchemage, a rare magic affinity support champion from the Dwarves faction. I'm guessing some of these champions may well be champions that we need to do the fusion, but we'll have to wait and see till Monday, I suppose. I mean, they pictured a dwarf, but obviously he's a rare, not an epic, and there weren't any epics up there, but we'll see. Okay, so we've got Flask of Vitriol, attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of placing a 5% poison debuff for 2 turns. Corroding Catalyst, attacks all enemies and has a 50% chance of placing a 25% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. Also places a 15% decreased speed debuff for 1 turn on targets under poison. So obviously that pairs quite well with his A1 there, which is kind of cool. And he's got this sort of magey alchemist sort of motif around him. And then we've got Vitalizing Potions. Fills the turn meters of all allies by 15% and heals all allies by 15% of this champion's max HP. Which certainly makes it worth really building his HP out. You know, try and get him a bit higher there so we can give him a bit of a stronger heal. But yeah, he sounds like a pretty cool champion, and it will certainly, I think, help out on the Dwarves faction for Faction Wars. Alright, I'm going to butcher this name. So we've got Kaesta, and the Force Affinity attack-based champion from the Bannerlords. His A1 is Undaunted Assault, attacks one enemy, inflicts 30% extra crit damage if this champion has less than 50% HP. That'll be quite cool. Guiding Example. Attacks one enemy, places a 15% increased crit damage buff on all allies for 2 turns if this attack is critical. So obviously you're going to be building him out with 100% crit, and then you can get this increased crit damage by 30%, 15% on all allies, which is quite cool. So you know, you add that to that, for him he can get an extra 45% crit damage. So depending on his build, he might be able to hit nice and hard. It's just going to depend about his multipliers really, more than anything else. And then we've got his A3 Depletion, attacks one enemy and has a 75% chance of removing 2 random buffs from the target. Okay, nothing special on long cooldown, but you know, it'll be interesting to see what he can do. Next up we have Renouncer, a rare Force Affinity attack-based champion from the Sacred Order. His A1 is Redoubled Effort, attacks one enemy 2 times, nothing special. Shining Sword, removes 1 random debuff from this champion, then attacks one enemy, heals the champion by 25% of the damage inflicted. Again, okay, but nothing special, no sort of team synergy there or anything really. Battlefield Grace, attacks one enemy, places a 15% increased speed buff on all allies for 2 turns if this attack kills an enemy. So, you know, if he's hitting hard enough, he may be able to put out an increased speed, but it's on a 5-turn cooldown. Personally, I think this will be one that nobody will be all that bothered about, but we'll see. Next up, we have a kind of horror-looking sort of chap, Headsman, or just Headsman, but you know, a rare Spirit Affinity attack-based champion from the Sacred Order. His A1 Public Execution, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 10% chance of placing a fear debuff for 1 turn. Then we've got his A2 Headman's Due, attacks all enemies, has 30% chance of placing a 100% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns. So far he's looking like a bit of a finite champion. Obviously the fear doesn't work on the finite, but he's got 2-turn attack there, 30% chance of placing heal reduction, which again comes in handy for the finite and at least one of the potion keeps. He's got a passive, so 2 active abilities and 1 passive. Judged Guilty, inflicts 15% more damage to targets under heal reduction debuffs. That's quite nice. He gets out the heal reduction and he'll do more damage to anybody with it. Purgator, a rare magic affinity attack-based champion from the Sacred Order. The Sacred Order seem to be getting quite a few. They've already got lots of champs, haven't they? Could have done with stocking out some of the other factions instead. Oh well. His A1, Doom Inescapable, attacks one enemy 2 times, will ignore shield buffs. It's not too bad. His A2, the Great Purge, attacks all enemies, inflicts 10% extra crit damage for each debuff on this champion, stacks up to 50%. That'd be quite a nice little hitter there. He could be an interesting character that might be able to do some damage for you. Then we've got Humble the Heathen, attacks one enemy, decreases target's max HP for 20% of damage inflicted. I'm never personally a big fan of these decreases max HP champions. Never seems to do that much. Anyway, let's move on. We've got a pretty little guy here. We've got Drowned Bloat Wraith, a rare void affinity attack-based champion from the Undead Hordes. A1 Anchor Hook, attacks one enemy, has a 15% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. The chance of placing the stun debuff increases by 5% for each debuff on the target. So again, very much like one up above, he can increases chance quite nicely for landing that stun. Then we've got Wretched Stench. Attacks all enemies, has an 85% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Also has a 25% chance of placing a fear debuff for 1 turn on enemies under decreased defense debuffs. And that's quite cool. So he'll do a decreased defense, possibly put on a fear. So if they've already got the decreased defense up from somebody else, I'm guessing, unless this goes on first, then that automatically gives this the chance. We'll have to see. Heals his champion by Death Feast. His passive heals his champion by 15% of their max HP every time this champion or an ally kills an enemy. And next up we have Solaris, a rare Force Affinity attack-based champion from the Sacred Order again. Blimey, they are getting an awful lot of new rares. We have his A1 Cleansing Light, attacks one enemy, has a 30% chance of removing one random buff from the target. A2 Solar Shield, attacks one enemy, places a shield buff on this champion equal to 20% of the damage inflicted for 2 turns. So far, he's not a champion I would bring into any team, to be honest, but anytime you get a large influx of champions like this, you're going to have a few that are just a complete waste of time that you wouldn't bother with. Again, it's all too solo. It removes one buff on a one hitter, shields him only for 20% of the damage. His A3 Blinding Bash, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn. Again, it's a one hitter, so nothing exciting there. Let's move on, and we have Wyvern Bane, a rare Spirit Affinity attack based champion from the Orcs faction. Pretty cool looking picture here. The A1 Hobble Pierce, attacks one enemy, has a 20% chance of placing a 15% decreased speed debuff for 2 turns. Be nice if that was an AoE decreased speed, but again, they're only rare, so we'll take what we can get. The A2 Setback, attacks one enemy, has a 35% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 20%, so a lot of turn meter and speed reduction and whatnot here, which we like. Curse Fire Spear, attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a HP burn debuff for 2 turns. Again, not a champion I'd be interested in trying out personally, but some of you out there get her and you ain't got anything better, you may well find some uses for her. Next up we have Wagon Bane, a rare Magic Affinity support based champion from the Ogrin tribes. The A1 Eye Blight, attacks one enemy, has a 35% chance of placing a 50% decrease accuracy debuff for 2 turns. Could be interesting in certain situations, I suppose. The A2 Hatgore Magic, attacks one enemy and places a 7.5% continuous heal buff on the ally with the lowest HP for 2 turns. Okay, nice little support move, but nothing too special. And then we've got the A3 Start the Mayhem. Cool name. We'll look at the Ascended skill again. Attacks one enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Also has a 75% chance of decreasing the target's turn meter by 15%. Okay, but again, all very much one single target and all the rest of it. Not too impressed there. Okay, next up we've got Ripper Fist, rare Void Affinity attack-based champion from the Orcs faction. It looks kind of cool. It's A1 Mangler Gauntlet, attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance of placing a 25% decrease attack debuff for 2 turns. Now this is quite cool. Attacks one enemy 2 times. Each hit has a 30% chance. Especially if that can be booked up a bit, it might make him viable for clan boss for your decreased attack champion. Especially on the A1 with a 2-hitter. It's A2 Rip to Shreds, attacks one enemy 3 times. Each hit places 100% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns if this champion has full HP. Each hit places a 50% heal reduction debuff for 2 turns if this champion has less than 100% HP. Nice, interesting. Okay, so this screams out Fire Knight. This sounds more clan boss. I'm not so sure about that one, to be honest, and obviously in the clan boss it's going to give you an unwanted buff. Okay, Bloody Mess passive places a 25% increase attack buff on this champion for 1 turn and decreases the cooldown of the Rip to Shred skill every time this champion HP drop below 50%. So that could be quite cool. Definitely think it's probably more usable in the Fire Knight than anywhere else from the sounds of things. Next up we have Dollar Lawkeeper, a rare force support champion from the Dwarves faction. We have the A1 Banisher Axe attacks one enemy, has a 25% chance of placing a block cooldown skills debuff for 1 turn. Stern Punishment attacks one enemy, has a 40% chance of placing a stun debuff for 1 turn if the target is under any debuff. That's kind of cool, it's only on a 3-turn cooldown. Then we've got the A3 Forebear's Boon, places a 15% continuous heal buff on all allies for 2 turns. Also places a block debuffs buff on the target ally for 1 turn if they have less than 100% HP. That can be kind of cool. And then the Aura increases ally HP in all battles by 15%. Next up we have Doomstrider, a rare magic affinity attack based champion from the Barbarians faction. The A1 Desert Wind attacks one enemy and has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Nomad Stride attacks 3 times at random. Each critical hit decreases the target's turn meter by 10%. Will only decrease the turn meter once per target. Attacks 3 times at random. Each critical. So this makes it sound more like an arena champion, because obviously you're only going to get a turn meter decrease once on the Fire Knight. But in arena you may well get a turn meter decrease if you've maxed her out for crit on 3 champs in the arena. And then we've got the A3 Harsh Mercy. We'll go for the ascending skill. Attacks all enemies, then attacks the enemy with the lowest HP. Has a 75% chance of placing 100% heal reduction debuff on the enemy with the lowest HP for 2 turns. Nothing special there. Next up we have Gloril Brutebane, a rare spirit affinity attack based champion from the Dwarves faction. He is A1 Scale Hacker, attacks one enemy 2 times each hit, has a 30% chance of placing a 30% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. This might be nice enough, but it's only again a 1 target thing. Prey Acquired is A2, attacks one enemy, damage increases by 5% for each debuff on the target. It can be slightly cool, but he doesn't really put out the debuffs himself, so you know, decreased defense is about it. So you'd certainly synergise better with somebody putting out a lot of debuffs. Heroic Company is A3, attacks one enemy, places a 15% increased crit rate buff on all allies for 2 turns if this attack is critical. And then his Aura increases ally resist in all battles by 30, which, you know, for a rare isn't bad. Not bad at all. Next up we have Dilgol, a void attack based champion from the Dwarves faction. A1 Gripler Round, attacks one enemy, has a 40% chance of placing a 15% decrease speed debuff for 2 turns. Is A2 Shot Spray, attack skill, let's go for the Ascended. Attacks all enemies 2 times, each hit has a 50% chance of placing a 50% decrease accuracy speed debuff for 2 turns. Okay, nothing special. Places the lower version on the Unascended. And then his third is obviously a bit of a dwarf archer of some sort, or crossbowman. His A3 Big Game Hunter, attacks one enemy 3 times each hit, has a 40% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff for 2 turns. Now, while not amazing, it does mean, and again it's only on a 5-turn cooldown, possibly able to be booked down though. Oh, wait a minute, attacks one enemy 3 times. Now, you see, if this was at random at least it'd make sense, but you've basically got a good chance of decreasing the defense of 1 champion, but not multiple champions. And there we have it. So that was all our new champions. That brings us to the end of this roundup video. Actually, before we end, we will just add, obviously, with the fusion coming on Monday, it's worth preparing in advance as much as you can. So you want to be saving up those pots, doing your potion runs this week, trying to make sure you've got a good stock of potions up because you're going to need them, trying to make sure you've got some chickens ready to go, levelling up those 2 stars to 3 stars, 3 to 4 maybe, certainly doing what you can. Obviously you've not got a lot of time, we're talking a few days. You're certainly not going to be able to farm that many potions in those few days, but it would have been nice to have had a bit more notice with this again, but you know how they like to do this, and you know it's always coming. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, look forward to seeing you in the next one. If you like this video, please subscribe and please give it a like. IceMan out.